It's trade in Equity Bank, BAT, Safaricom that seems to dominate on a daily basis, while we've got local investors particularly active on East African breweries, KCB and Barclays Bank as well. Do you have a particularly keen eye on any counter outside of the obvious?
Outside of those, I would say I'm looking at Kenya Airways as well, which has had an under the radar rally of about 50% in the last 6 weeks, and there seems to be a real change of sentiment with this counter, and I think there's the potential for it to push on quite a lot higher. Over the last 6 months, Safaricom and KQ have been the outperformers, I think.
Well, taking a look at some of the news out on Friday, we finally saw Barclays Bank out with numbers. Market reaction to those numbers now that it's had time to digest some of those figures?
Well, I think the market didn't expect a great deal of growth. Do recall there was a write back of the loan loss provisions of quite a material amount into these third quarter results, but it seems most of that was all in the price. I think they've been playing defense for quite some time, so nobody expected any sharp growth numbers, and they seem to have done well enough in the circumstances, I think.
Looking at those figures, I mean, pre-tax profit rose 4.7% for the 9 months to September, and the company really attributing those better results to better risk management, cost cutting as well, but also to improved lending. Just looking at that, I mean, isn't it a case, and I asked this to the trader that I was speaking to on Friday, isn't this more a case of, instead of better risk management strategies, a case of the bank not lending as freely as it did in the past?
Absolutely. I think you're completely correct. The better risk management strategy is coming out of the fact that they've written back this quite large amount from the loan loss provision. But I think they've been playing defense. They haven't been lending. I mean, if you compare it to a couple of years back when really they were knocking on your door, it's not like that at all. They've battened down the hatches, and exactly as you've said, they basically transferred a lot of their loan book into Government of Kenya bonds. That's what's happened.
At the same time, we've seen the Central Bank of Kenya just, coming down on these banks, saying that they need to start lowering interest rates. Of course, we've got the Central Bank of Kenya this week, in fact, tomorrow, due to announce its rates decision. What are your expectations there, considering that inflation has plunged to 6.6%?
Yes, we've had this change in the measure of inflation, and I think 6.6, quite a few people are optically surprised at that number, but I think it's in the ballpark. I think the problem with the adjusting the interest rate tomorrow by the central bank is exactly the point you're making, that there's been a lack of transmission of that rate through to the banks and the banks to the customers. So I think it's not necessary right now for the central bank to cut rates. They should instead be focusing on the transmission effects. I think that's very clear.
Well, certainly Kenya's banking industry regulator is set to renew its efforts for commercial banks to cut their lending rates to reflect the drastic drop we've seen in inflation as well. This has been tried before, so what's the merit in them actually coming to the fore and playing along now?
Well, I don't think they should cut. I don't think they should cut until they see some kind of transmission in lower rates by the banks. And I think
I'm talking, Aly-Khan, about the banks themselves. Yes. Do you see these banks actually coming to the fore and playing ball?
No, I don't. Not at the moment. I think the banks will argue that there's been a much more competitive deposit mobilization scenario, and that you've got people paying very high rates of deposit. I think that's a spurious argument because they have enormous spreads between their lending and their borrowing rates, but they seem able so far to withstand the central bank pressure. I'm not sure what tips them over, but clearly, they're sitting at the moment. They're sitting, and actually, there are a toll charge on the economy, I think, as the central bank would argue.